Greetings, everyone. My name is Jen Gerlach. I am an assistant professor in the Counseling and Educational Psychology Department. I'm in my second year at TAMU CC. And today we are going to talk about writing qualitative methodology and then your results section for your dissertation. What you can expect here, we're going to talk about writing the method section and then writing the results, and then kind of go through some common mistakes that doctoral students or very beginning researchers make when they are when they're writing their dissertation, and then questions and discussions at the end. So, what goes into a method section? It's really important that you describe the research tradition first, and then kind of segue that into the recruitment of your recruitment procedure and your eligible participants. Providing demographic information to describe your population is also would also go into the method section. And then you're going to describe an outline for your procedure. So what steps that you took when to be as transparent about your methodology as possible. In qualitative research, it's really important to describe the researcher bias and the researcher team. This is also called positionality. And then you want to describe your instruments, and oftentimes the researcher is the instrument in qualitative research, but you also want to talk about, did you use focus groups? Was it a semi-structured interview? And then provide the protocol for that. So what questions you asked. If you were doing observations, then where you were observing, how often you did that. You describe the data that you collected, the data analysis. So what steps did you take to analyze your data and come up with your results? And it's really important that you're really transparent. In qualitative research, a lot of it is very procedural, and there are a lot of steps in data analysis, so it's really important that you describe those in your method section. And then the standards and strategies for trustworthiness. So that's another way to make sure that our trustworthiness is another way to describe the quality of our research. In quantitative research, it's usually called validity and reliability and the steps that you take for that. But in qualitative research, it's called trustworthiness, or often called trustworthiness. So the research tradition. It's really important that you identify the specific qualitative approach. So it's not enough just to say that you are doing a phenomenological study. There are often different types of phenomenology, for example. So you have to be really specific with your approach. It's really important to provide why you've chosen this approach and why this is the best approach for your study. So part of that could be a reference to your chapter 2 in your lit review. You've probably identified some gaps in your literature, and this is why your study is important. And so here, this would be where you say, I chose a grounded theory because this is the best methodology to describe this phenomenon, and kind of state your reasons why that is. And sometimes that can be linked back to previous research where there hasn't been a grounded theory study to support claims, or there hasn't been a phenomenological study to support things. So that justification is really important. And then this segues into your research question. So you've probably already stated that in your chapter 1, and then you want to state it again here. And the important part about your research question is to make sure that it's aligned appropriately with the methodology that you're using. So in qualitative research, those are generally broader, more open-ended questions. And they can have some specificity in dealing with a specific phenomenon, but you are avoiding words like cause, effect, impact, things like that. In quantitative research, you might see, or you often will see, multiple research questions. In qualitative research, you don't see multiple questions as often. Generally, it's one big question that you're trying to answer.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does that, so you said there's usually only one question, one research question. Does it matter what kind of methodology you're using, or say if I'm using, I don't know, grounded theory, would that have more questions than other?
Yeah. So usually it depends on when I say the type of research question. So for example, in phenomenology, often you will see what is the lived experience of someone's, whatever the phenomenon they're trying to identify. So Abram, what is yours?
The perceptions.
So so your question is dealing with the perceptions? Okay, so what are the perceptions of?
Oh no, I'm sorry. The research question.
Yeah.
What are the lived experiences of school counselors implementing? Yeah.
Gotcha, right. So Abrams is a phenomenological study, so his has lived experiences in there. Grounded theory is more about establishing a theory, and sometimes will have to do with a process. So the process that someone takes to become whatever. So the specific research tradition doesn't, you can have one question for each of the qualitative research traditions. Excuse me, but generally in quant research you see lots of very specific, not so much in qual research. Excuse me. For the participants, it's really important that you describe the sampling and the recruitment method. So how did you get your sample? What criteria do your participants need to meet in order to qualify for your study? And then how you recruited them. Was it purposeful sampling, where you identified a group of participants? Let's say you are interviewing teachers, and you went to a very specific teacher listserv to send out your recruitment material. So you're being purposeful in your criteria and then your recruitment. Or is it random sampling, where you're at the mall and you're handing out questionnaires to various people? So you have to describe the criteria to meet your study, as well as your the sampling method and the recruitment method. So if you used listservs, what listservs did you use? Describe the participant characteristics and demographic information. So that part's really important. Hello. You could include this as a chart form as well. So what did each of your participants look like? In qualitative research, you don't have the large numbers of participants that you do in quant research, so you can be specific by participant. And then provide justification for the number of participants as well. That part is really important. In qual research, you'll see anywhere from sample sizes of anywhere from 5 to 25, 30, 50 people. And really the important part is that you justify why you have the number of participants that you have. That justification is really important. In one of the qualitative books that I recommend at the end, by Hayes and Singh, they say that they've identified that sometimes researchers get hung up on 10 as the magic number for qualitative research, but that's not necessarily true. So if that does happen to be your number, that's fine, but then provide that justification for why that is. Hi. Positionality, this is also called researcher bias, and this describes the role of the researcher. So y'all are the researchers, right? And it describes who you are as the researcher. And so kind of my question to you guys is, why is that important? Why would you need to identify who you are?
Maybe any biases you might have.
Okay. And why is that important in qualitative research?
Because you're going to be looking at themes and things that arise, and you can't colonize, what you find. And so you have to lay out who you are, the purpose for why you're doing it, kind of in connections you have, so that it doesn't look like you have kind of made the data look in a certain way, I guess.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, you're very, very close. So in qualitative research, it essentially identifying who you are as a researcher or research team. So if there were multiple people that are involved in data collection and analysis, it's really important that you identify your position for each of those. It's less to be objective and more to really understand how you collected the data, the lens with which you collected the data and processed the data and analyzed it. So it really helps understand where you're coming from. You don't see that as much in quant research, but that lens of understanding and your connection to that data is really important in qualitative research. So this is definitely a part of the chapter 3 that you will need to include.
So is that connected to like professional identity as well?
Yeah. So for example, on my dissertation, mine was what are the lived experiences of academic advisors with counseling degrees and working with student athletes. And so in mine, I had to identify that I'm a school counselor and a doctoral student, or was a doctoral student, and then that I was a former student athlete, so that was my connection to the data. It does kind of help with, and we'll get into this with trustworthiness a little bit, but that reflexivity, kind of bracketing your own biases. And so in an effort like this, positionality kind of helps with that as well, and then helps the reader understand the lens that you're interpreting the data.
The positionality would have been different if you were an advisor.
Correct.
Versus.
Correct.
Okay.
Right. And I think I said there as well that it was my belief that academic advisors in college are almost like an extension of school counselors because they have so many of the same roles that we do, just a different set of training. So that was kind of where I was coming from. Data collection and analysis. So this is where in your chapter 3, you will describe the instrument. So again, you as the researcher, and then your interview questions. And it's not enough just to list your interview protocol. It's really important that you identify how you developed the protocol. And so what influenced you to come up with these questions? Was it your experience that prompted you to ask these questions? Was it the literature that prompted you to? Were these questions that had been asked in other articles? Was this something that you noticed was lacking? And so that's why I included it. So it's really important that you provide this justification for your interview protocol. Not just I asked about their experience and here are my questions, but elaborate on where you got those questions from, how they were developed. And then, well, that's an error. I put pilot up there twice. My apologies. Did you pilot the pilot interview protocol? So did you pilot the interview protocol is what it should say. And when I say, did you pilot the interview protocol, what does that mean?
Did you test them out?
Yeah. I do a pilot study with the same type of questioning to kind of see the influences, I guess, and then you do like your actual dissertation. So it's kind of like the mini study that comes before. Kind
of. So that would be a pilot study. When I say pilot the interview questions, that means just asking someone who could be a participant those questions. So you don't have to do a full-blown study or anything like that. So why would if I'm doing a study on doctoral students, why would it be important for me to identify someone who might kind of fit with my sample and ask them those questions first? They cannot be a part of my study in the future, but maybe I ask someone at Kingsville to pilot those questions for me. So why would that be important that I ask those questions before going into my data collection?
See how effective they are.
Okay, say more about effective.
Like, because I know in qual class, some of the questions like would prompt other questions, and like I hadn't thought about that. So that kind of, then I was like, oh well, I should have added that question to my, I guess.
Good, yeah. So when you ask those questions, maybe the response generated, oh wow, maybe I should make this question that kind of organically came from my pilot, include that in my protocol. Yeah. Good, great. What else?
Maybe your questions they need to be more specific, or they need to be refined, so that you're actually going to get the data that you're looking for.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Okay. You could think that you have this this great protocol, and you go in with your first participant and it is not at all capturing, it doesn't connect. And so piloting your interview questions is a really good way to see, am I getting at what I'm trying to capture? And then how did you collect the, yeah.
How many people do we select for pilot?
1 or 2. Like it doesn't have to, yeah, it doesn't have to be a whole great number of people.
Just 1 or 2 is enough.
Yeah, so for my dissertation, I piloted my questions with 2 people, but it was at the same time. So they were both academic advisors. They were actually in the program, in my doctoral program with me. And so I piloted my questions there. I'm doing a study right now on child abuse reporting for counselors. And so I piloted my questions with a school counselor who happened to be my sister. She's also my school counselor. And so she gave me some feedback, some very honest feedback. So I guess that was the advantage of having my sister as my pilot interviewee. But I got feedback on whether the questions, the wording made sense, whether the order made sense. Sometimes you don't always ask questions in the order of your protocol. Because it kind of inhibits the flow. But for her, I did. And there were some wording issues and some order issues that didn't quite make sense. And so that was really good feedback for me to help kind of clear up and make my protocol as smooth as possible for when I was interviewing my participants. For your data collection, this is where you identify how did you collect your data. Were these individual interviews? Were they focus groups? Were they field observations? And then how is it stored and protected? So those are, and this part of it, you can really get a lot of that information from your IRB protocol because you have to put that in there. And so, you know, everything has to be password protected. Did you use pseudonyms for your participants? Did you allow your participants to come up with their own, or is that something you assigned to them? And then how do you know you have enough data? So how do you guys know that you have enough data for qual research?
For mine, it was the saturation process.
Okay, and what does that mean?
So saturation is a process in which you and I think it's done it's done with like a team, or there needs to be somebody else, but you both kind of have a review of the data, and then when you reach the point to where there's no new insights, or there's not any more insights coming out, that's when you reach the saturation. So you can kind of either decide to stay there or kind of continue on.
Right. Yeah.
So for mine, I reached saturation at 5.
Okay.
Needed to, I went further.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else? Any other thoughts on how you know you have enough?
Like if you've already developed all your themes and there are no more, is that the same thing?
Yeah, that's very similar to saturation. And so saturation is often it's a common way to establish that you fulfill, you're not having any more themes emerge. But saturation isn't the end all be all of knowing if you have enough data. Because it might not match your study. Does that make sense? Yep. So if you're doing an ethnography or you're doing a case study, how do you know, like, it doesn't always match. So really making sure that you're in the literature and and whatever it is, you're supporting why these are your final themes, why these are your final results, and how you got there. And then that's when you need to bring in literature to support that. It's not just enough to say, oh, I think it is, right? So we need to look at what previous researchers have used for their justification. And then analyzing the data. So this is where you talk about the steps that you took, and this is where you will consult previous literature to see exactly how data was analyzed, how many rounds of coding did you do, what type of coding was it, and I use coding very broadly. Who was involved in your data analysis? Was it just you? Did you have a research team? Those sort of things. So this is where you have to provide very detailed steps. So for example, in my dissertation, we had 3 research team members. So there's myself and then 2 of my peers who had a qualitative class, and they were also working on qual research. And they, and we had identified in the researcher bias that, they were identified in that as well. And we independently coded the very first transcript. And so we independently went through and made notes. We memoed, we wrote our impressions, we pulled out what we thought were salient, and then we met together and we discussed. And the first thing we discussed was, did all of the interview questions, did those capture what we were looking for, or do I need to go back and add more? And then after we met that first time, then I went and interviewed the rest of my participants because we determined we didn't need to add any more questions. And then we would independently code each of the transcripts and come back together and discuss. And after the first couple ones, we kind of came up with a preliminary code book. And then as we independently coded the additional ones, if we thought, wow, we haven't seen this in other transcripts yet, then we added to it. And so then we would come back each time. So all of those steps have to be detailed in your chapter 3. Does that make sense? Okay. So trustworthiness. This is where we talk about this is essentially another word for validity and reliability, which is often what we see in quantitative research. So this is what we will call, this is kind of the qual version of that. So member checking, what is member checking?
When we did it in class, I'm trying to remember, we did kind of bounced back and forth. And so if I had asked you a question and you said, yes, that has been an experience that I've had before, then I kind of probe and prompt another question. Well, okay, so tell me about that experience, right? Do you kind of go back and forth, or is that not it?
Nope, that's what the interview, that's okay. Thank you for offering. That's what the interview protocol. So that's kind of a semi-structured interview where you say, tell me more about that, and you try to get more details.
Is this when you show the person?
Yes, show them.
And is this, because I've done this, and so whenever I interview someone, I send it to them, and I say...
You send what to them?
I send the transcript to them, sorry.
Yes. Nope, you're good. No, you're...
I'm so sorry for being late, by the way.
That's okay.
So sorry.
That's all right.
Oh my gosh. So I would do the interviews, and I would transcribe them.
Yep.
And then I would send, and I would request that the person look through it and say, hey, is this really what you meant? Did I miss anything? Did I say it correctly? And yeah.
Yes. Perfect. Yes. So member checking, and that's one way to member check. Okay. So after you interview your participants and the interview is transcribed, then you send those back to them. Right. And you say, did I capture, is this exactly what you said? And if there's anything that was misrepresented, you're welcome to let me know. If there's anything you want to add, you're welcome to do that. So it gives them the opportunity to check to make sure that they were represented accurately. Transcripts, I don't hear back from people, and that's okay. So don't get discouraged in your process if that happens. And so a lot of times it might be a good idea to say, hey, here's the transcript. Let me know by this date. Give them a week to review, or 2 weeks, whatever you think is an appropriate timeline to review. And then if you don't hear from them, which oftentimes happens, then you know that you're okay to go ahead and go. Sometimes people will write back and say, yeah, this was great, thank you so much. But giving them the opportunity to make sure that they're accurately represented is a method of trustworthiness. What other method of member checking is there? It's okay, it's Saturday morning, or technically afternoon, I guess. But, so, there's, you can member check the results of your study. So your findings. So after you've analyzed, so maybe you member check the actual transcripts, and then after you complete your analysis and you have everything finalized, sending it back to your participants to say, hey, here's what I came up with. Do you have any thoughts about that? Do you think this, how do you think this is, or do you think this is representative of you?
Is that per person, or is that you're sending them a list of your themes? Or how does that look like?
Yeah, so you can send them a list, like the charts and stuff that you've been sending me, Abram. Like you can send them a list of, like, this is what it came up with, your themes, definitions of your themes, and then if you wanted to provide some examples, yeah. If you do send it to everyone all at once, make sure you blind copy, use blind copy for sending the emails, and not because you don't want to disclose participants' email addresses to each other, because then they can identify who else was in the study.
So so this is the first I've heard this. This is so interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I'm sending this back to my participants, am I asking them, do you feel that all of that you are being fully represented in this data somewhere? Not do all of these things represent you because other people are involved here.
Yes.
But it's another way of asking, did I miss anything?
Correct.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
For you particularly. Okay,
Correct.
Got it now.
Right.
Thank you.
But some of that is, not every statement or experience that a participant has merits representation in your final themes.
Okay.
So just making sure that that's clear to them.
Got it.
So that, hey, I know that this was your experience. It's somewhere in here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yep. And if you do it by participant, maybe you just provide them snapshots of their quotation marks from their transcript.
Got it.
That this is where what you said fits with this.
Got it.
What do you think?
Okay. Thank you.
And would you also show them, like you're saying, tables and charts with the entire result?
So the tables and charts I was representing was usually like the themes. So I'm Abram's methodologist on his dissertation, and he's done a really fantastic job. Like, I feel bad for my dissertation chair because Abram has done a really great job with being very visual. It's great. It's like going forward, I'm going to use these for my own research. So I have like a list of themes, and then your sub themes, and then you have definitions for each, and then your evidence, which is your participant quotes. So it's just in table format. Yeah.
It seems like that would be easier.
Yeah, and that's what I would send. Something that's like succinct. You don't need to send your whole data set. They will have no idea, but just. Exactly. Okay. Just charts with here were my findings, here are the names of the theme or sub-themes, here are the definitions, here's the evidence.
Okay.
Triangulation of data and researchers. So, what is triangulation?
I'm trying to remember what the quantitative word is, because I know it's a reliability. There it is. So it's kind of like a way of adding confidence to the data that's represented, or the procedure in which you get the data.
Yeah. So it's not just what I solely think. This isn't my interpretation with no one else's opinions or other evidence to check and either support or refute what I've found. So triangulation of data, that could be you're doing interviews with people, and then you've done some observations. That could be, there's one study, actually by my chair, it just came out in one of our counseling journals she did a grounded theory research study on like the leadership qualities of ACA presidents. So ACA is the American Counseling Association. So it's our biggest division, and she did a grounded theory approach with that, and she interviewed as many of those former presidents as she could, and then she triangulated the data by looking at their CVs. So to check like their experiences and make sure it was reflective in their CVs, and as a way just to make sure that she's being accurate and understanding things correctly. Does that make sense?
That's considered like content analysis, right?
Not content analysis so much, but it's triangulating the data just to make sure it matches up, and how that they're not misrepresenting and she's not misunderstanding, because it's confirming their experiences. Does that make sense?
So that has nothing to do with the themes that emerge? Or does it? I'm just trying to make sense of.
Yeah, so not so much, but it's just confirming that how they represented and what they, and what they said and how they were represented is confirmed in their CV. So it's just another way to make sure that she, as the researcher, wasn't misinterpreting what her participants were saying. Does that make sense?
It totally does. Can you give me a couple other examples besides like looking at a CV? What could you use potentially?
Yeah, so if you had focus group interviews and then you had each participant, you were doing an intervention, and you had focus group and then they journaled about their experiences.
Right.
Journals is another way to triangulate the data.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm doing comps now and I'll propose in the summer and start this. I'm gonna do mixed methods, but one will be an intervention and then the other one will be kind of like you're saying, like having the students journal. So how would I triangulate that? Do you know? That's a hard question.
That is a hard question. So some of that might be, yeah, that's a hard question. It might be with your quant results from that could,
Feed into that.
yeah, that could be a way, but I'm not gonna swear to it. I'm like dipping my toe into the mixed methods pool, and I'm usually just the qual person in those studies.
What I have come across with that is that in mixed methods, what we would consider triangulation in qual is not triangulation in mixed methods. So you would have to triangulate the quantitative data and then triangulate the qualitative data.
Oh, separately. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. I got
I
that.
think so. I think what you're saying is there are different methodology in mixed method research. So you either do quant first and then you do qual.
Right.
Flip it over. And there are different methods.
Yeah, there's sequential, exactly. And these are just sample. You might not. So to kind of correct myself, you might not be able to do this type of trustworthiness because you might not have other qual data.
Okay.
So you don't have to use every single one of. Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So these are just methods of trustworthiness. You don't have to do every single one because you might not have that. If that makes sense.
Yes.
And I
That's
think
perfect.
it makes methods because you have quant data. I would assume that's when you hit the reliability and the validity.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
All right, okay.
And so maybe what are you doing for the qual piece? They're journaling, or they're.
So what we're gonna do read alouds to measure, so it's gonna be a pre-test and a post-test on math vocabulary. So seeing if the read alouds fosters comprehension of math vocabulary. So
Okay.
analyze that data and then have the students reflect and journal and kind of see what themes emerge from the written aspect.
Yeah, and so then you could member check your results from that. Like that could be a way that you, instead of doing a triangulation of data, you maybe could member check. Or you could also do a triangulation of researchers. What does that mean? So we've talked about the data piece, triangulating the data.
Is that what, does my, I think this is right, does my research match what other researchers have done? Not done, but does it connect it?
Kind of.
Okay.
Kind of.
I feel like I'm not.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I'm asking tough questions on a Saturday. You guys are stressed doc students.
A
Like,
lot of credit.
No.
If you ask me this, I'm gonna.
no. So triangulation of researchers, that means, are you coding all of these by yourself?
Oh,
Or are you bringing in other people?
okay.
Does that, so you're going through all of your journals and you're doing the independent analysis, and you have a friend or two, ideally two, so that it's a literal triangulation. And so that it's not you just saying what the results are, that you're getting other people's perspectives and their own lenses with their own experience, and you guys are coming together to talk about it. That is triangulation of
And
researchers.
so I'm so sorry.
This is exactly what I'm much more
I'm
interactive.
actually doing a content analysis
Yeah.
of mine.
Yes.
And I'm doing it with Caldecott books and social emotional learning competencies.
Awesome.
They're in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So I should like hook up with you too.
Yeah, that's cool.
If you don't mind.
Totally fine.
Okay. So this would be, and I'm going to analyze all these different books. But again, it's me making. So this would be me doing this with, and I have other people do it to make sure that I'm not off and never. Look.
But they're doing it with you, which is different than a peer debriefer, which we'll talk about in just a second.
Okay.
So they are are in the data with you.
Okay.
And you guys are constantly discussing and
Okay.
agreeing so this has a little bit to do with like almost like inter-rater reliability when
Yes. Okay.
does that make sense?
Yes.
And sometimes they'll even ask you for those numbers in journal stuff. So,
Okay.
and those are generally really super quant people that want some sort of numbers of things.
Yeah. Okay.
So that would be where you bring in 2 of your peers, and it's almost like, so my cohort members, or I didn't have very many of them. So it was other people who were in my program. It was like, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Like, you serve as a peer coder on mine, and then I'll help with yours.
Okay. So I was going to ask you, like, oh boy, that's a lot.
It's a lot to ask. Yeah. And so then you offer to be there for them when it's their turn.
And do you include that in your chapter?
Yes. So when we go back and talk about positionality, who are you? Who is your research team?
Okay.
So the people that were involved in the analysis and how they identify. So we might not always have the opportunity to triangulate the data. You will have opportunity to triangulate the researchers, usually. Peer debriefer. So how is that different? Or what is a peer debriefer, first of all? Want to take a guess, Abram?
Okay, so like an extra pair of eyes after you have your data set.
Yes.
Just kind of, I mean, what it says, somebody to debrief what your results have been.
Yeah, absolutely. So your peer debriefer is someone who is familiar with your study, but not in the analysis with you. And so they kind of take a bird's eye view after you've done your analysis, and they serve as a sounding board, as a devil's advocate. They're there to support and also challenge your results. So they're not someone that's in it with you, because sometimes, especially in qual, you're so in it, you can't see. Exactly. And so you need someone who's familiar with what you're doing, but not so in it with you, so that they can provide some perspective. So Abram's defending it next month, actually, which is really, really exciting. And I'm his peer debriefer. And so, do you want to share a little bit about what that process has been like? And you're not going to hurt my feelings if I've been terrible and brutal.
Very supportive. So one of the key, I say, characteristics of the debriefer versus a member of the research team is that the debriefer they're not a part of the data collection, so they won't give you like hints as to what they think a theme is.
Got it.
It's just, and that was something that you were very careful with. Is
Yes.
She didn't want to imply her own opinion on what my view of the themes were. Whereas the person that helped me construct the themes was very vocal about, so this is what I got, this is what you got, it could be this, it could be that. And so it's been a very, so it's my data, but she's looking at it through her eyes and just kind of making sure that, and encouraging me to look at it differently. It's really important to step back. That was one of the things that you reminded me to do, is step back from it and then.
Yes, and it's really, really hard to do, especially when you're on a timeline, like for your dissertation. When you guys are future educators and you're in academia, you have a little bit more flexibility to be like, okay, I can step away from this for a couple of weeks and take a break and then go back and revisit it. It's a little more challenging when you're a doc student, because you guys have deadlines, right? And they're not friendly deadlines. So, to graduate by May, Abram has to defend by like the last week of March. And in order for that to happen, he has to have stuff in 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time, so work backwards. That's just a little doctoral student tip, because I'm not super far removed from it. Work backwards from your timelines, because that will help you kind of visualize what you need to do when. But when you're in academia, you can step away a little bit easier when you're in your study.
So is it safe to say that your debriefer is going to potentially be one of your committee members?
I would say that that's probably a good guess, because they're involved. They've read your stuff, they're familiar with it. but they're not so in it to where they can't be objective.
Okay.
I would also say too that it's really important that the peer debriefer knows the content or knows your positionality.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Dr. Gerlach was a school counselor, so she understands the frame that I'm seeing in.
Okay.
If I would have chose a qual person from
They would.
another area,
Yeah.
it would have been, I feel like it would have been different, and I have colleagues that have done that.
Okay.
It's hard.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah.
So another method of trustworthiness, and this is something that y'all can do, is provide a thick description. When I say that, what does that mean?
Very detailed.
Yes, very detailed how.
I just remember when I took qual and my paper ended up being, I think, about 45 pages, but it was still like, okay, give me more, explain it more. How did, like, it's not enough to just say, okay, well, this theme, arose. Well, how? What did it
Right.
mean? How did you break it down? And so it really makes you stop and look at every single part of everything that you've gathered.
Right.
Give more, give more.
Yes, you are providing the best, fullest, thickest, richest description of whatever it is that you are investigating, so that people know exactly where you're coming from and what your results will look like and why. A reflexive journal, what is that?
That is actually a great thing. I did that when I took qual 2, and we did that. So what we did was we looked at the doctoral journey of doctoral students, and she had us do interviews amongst each other. And then every single time after, we went for like, I think it was 15 or 20 minutes, and we just wrote our reflections, how it went, because she says you're going to get home and you're going to forget and you won't remember, and so it really puts you on the spot to really kind of say, this is what happened, this is my kind of reflection of the process.
Yeah, why is that important to write your reflections, both not only after or during data collection, but also during the analysis piece? Why is that important to get that out on paper? You can also phone a friend. I'm not just trying to pick on you.
I think it gets you out of your head, for one, and then it lets you bracket.
Yes.
It kind of, in my experience, when I journal and I'm analyzing it, it allows me to just look at it as fresh as I can.
Yeah.
Okay, I think to a certain degree you can't bracket 100%.
Right, of course.
Yeah, it lets you just kind of look at it anew sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes when in the collection phase of things, you've interviewed and your interview didn't go quite the way you wanted it to, or it was a little more challenging, or you had different expectations. And I found this to be the case in a study that I'm doing right now. It's a mixed methods on the child abuse reporting with counselors. I had a really terrible experience. Like my entire 6 years as a school counselor, I had our CPS back in Virginia, and in my area in particular, I had really, really challenging interactions with them. And so I went in thinking everyone else was going to have this same experience. And I actually walked away with some interviews where people were like, it wasn't that bad. Like the system in and of itself is really hard and really challenging, but the people I worked with were really great. They were responsive. They did all of these things. And I was like, a little, because that was not, and I'm glad that was their experience, but what about mine? So that's where I found that usually with those interviews, I journaled a little longer because there was more for me to process. So it's also important too to make sure that you're doing this during the data analysis phase. So you might not, kind of goes with expectations. What you might be expecting to find might not be supported by the data, and that can be kind of hard. So it's really important to make sure that you're getting that out, that you're checking yourself, that you're processing, and that you cannot make the data what you want it to be. And that's hard. That's hard to do that sometimes. So that's where the reflexive journal comes in.
So that's just you, that's not going to be incorporated into your dissertation at all, but that's just you as a researcher.
Yes.
Making sure that you don't plug in any biases or anything that you have into the research.
Correct. So that's where you say in your chapter 3, in this part of it, you're going to have a section on trustworthiness or credibility or, whatever all of the names are. And you're going to talk about, I kept a reflexive journal both during data collection and analysis phases to help me bracket my assumptions, to keep myself in check. But you don't have to actually keep your, attach your journals or anything like that. And then an audit trail. What's an audit trail?
It's kind of a detailed list of your steps and your procedures.
Yeah, so an audit trail is where it's from start to finish, everything from here's the call for participants that I sent, like from that very first step all the way through till the end, all of your stuff. So your reflexive journals, your interview protocol, your call for participants, the notes that you kept while you were coding and that your peers kept, your peer coders kept, everything, all rounds of that, each round of analysis, kind of how you teased out those themes, all of that stuff goes into an audit trail so that you can have someone come in and look through your process to make sure that you did it with fidelity, that you did what you were supposed to do and when, that what you're saying matches up with what's in your dissertation or in your journal article. So that is chapter 3. It's not always a really long chapter, but not compared to chapter 2, but it's very prescriptive. And there's not a whole lot of creativity in chapter 3. But it needs to be very detailed. That's where you're going to get the length, is from those details. So a results section, you want to provide introductory sentences kind of describing the overall themes. So introduce us to what we're going to read in chapter 4. Is everyone doing, I know Abram you're not, but is everyone doing a 5-chapter dissertation? Okay, we have a modified one in counseling, so yeah, you have to write a journal article and then do feedback, and then that way you have a publishable thing ready to go. So you can choose between the two, and so Abram chose that one. So I'm most familiar.
It sounds easy.
But it
gives you the publishable thing.
Correct. Yes.
That's helpful.
Yeah. But it's challenging because you take all of your data,
Right.
and then you have to reduce it to 25 pages.
Right.
And it's very, very.
And not even that. It's probably
It's less than that, right? Because your final article, you have 7 pages of references, and then it's very, very hard. So you're learning earlier what I learned when I first started this job. I was trying to publish my dissertation. Try to cut a 200-page thing to 25 pages.
Wow.
It's the worst. It was so hard.
And then you can't plagiarize yourself too.
Right. No,
You're having to
I
rewrite
hate
that.
that, and that is so hard. That's the hardest
Yep.
for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we want a little introduction. So we have chapter 3, and I remember when I was writing mine, transitions were probably my biggest point of feedback from my chair, was to make sure that you're transitioning, using transition sentences and paragraphs and all that stuff that I hated. I thought I was done writing, and then she was like, no, go back and do it again. So making sure that we're providing a thick description should be reporting the findings, not describing, and then description in the same sentence. My apologies for my PowerPoint again. But that includes the definitions of your themes. So not just what they are, but what does it mean? How did you define it? The textual description, so the what, and the structural description, the how, and the composite, so how they all joined together. And then you need to provide evidence. Evidence of your findings. And so those are quotes. So that's what your participants said, or what you got out of your field observations, if that's one of your methods of data collection. This is the really fun part. So you've done the analysis is really challenging, and then the writing. Chapter 4 was by far the most fun to write for me. It's so cool because now you've analyzed everything. You've gone through several rounds of this stuff. You've worked with your peer debriefer. You've gotten edits and sent them back in, and you get more edits, and it's this back and forth constantly, and then you finally have it, and then you get to write it out, and it's fun. I really, really liked chapter 4. And so evidence, you can provide as much evidence in a traditional chapter 4 as you can. So making sure that you're using block quotes, making sure that you're really putting in there what needs to be in there though. I found myself using a lot of superfluous quotes that, or parts of quotes that participants use that I didn't really need to. So I would use ellipses, you know, the ... so that I could really get to the essence of what was being described. And then you transition. So essentially it's your main themes, your definitions, and then your evidence. And it's so fun. It's so fun. Like, this is the coolest part. I love it. It's so great. And that's your chapter 4. Like, there's not a whole lot. You're not really synthesizing things. You're not bringing in other literature. You're being really descriptive. And that's fun because there's not a, hey, you have 2 pages to write this. So you can make your chapter 4s as long as your chairs want, or as long as you want, because you can provide, and you want to provide multiple points of evidence for each theme. Now, this is the case in counseling journals. I don't know so much about other disciplines, but when you're chopping your dissertation for publication, and it's not written anywhere, I've been like constantly on the lookout for it. When I've been, you know, in writing and stuff, but I haven't found anything that says this is the number that you need to provide in an article. But anecdotally, my chair, she's really big into qual research, and she's a qual reviewer and editor, and some other people. And I went to one of her presentations on publication after I'd just gotten a not so friendly revision back from an editor, and so I was feeling kind of sad and down, and we were able to process. And one of the things that she shared in there was that she likes to see 3 pieces of evidence for each theme or sub-theme. So I don't know if that would necessarily apply to your fields, but when you say, hey, this was a major result of my study, and you only provide 1 piece of evidence, ugh, that doesn't translate, right? I've had editors ask me, and I didn't do this in my dissertation, and it might have been just because I provided so much evidence for each person. But I've had editors ask me, hey, well, how many of your participants had quotes that supported this theme?
Got it.
So 7 out of 9 did, or 8 out of 12. If it's 2 out of 10, does that really constitute a theme?
Right.
And so, not saying that it can't, but probably not. So just some things to keep in mind when you're writing your chapter 4 and then trying to translate that into a publication.
Where do you include that information? Like 7 out of 9 participants were about this.
Chapter 4.
Okay.
Yeah, or in your results section. So you say, like, this theme was, what's one of your themes?
So you're in like the whole child. So you're introducing the theme, and then in that paragraph.
Yes. So the whole child was the 3rd out of 4 themes here, and it means insert definition. And this kind of describes what participants were saying, and so you provide your own very brief narrative of it. And when you do that, you know, 8 out of the 12 participants referenced or stated something that was folded into this theme. That way it helps, and I understand why they do it. Some very, very qual people would say that doesn't matter. Quant people who already have a really hard time with qual research want to know. And then there's some people who are kind of moderate in the middle who understand. And I get that. Like, to me, that makes sense. But some purely qual people will say, that doesn't matter. So really work with your chairs and your mentors when you're writing for publication about what they expect, and then in their knowledge and expertise, what do editors expect?
I think like in the quant realm, you know how I think journals now are wanting reporting on the effect size of something.
Yes,
I feel like this is what that is for qual. It's like,
Got
Yep.
it. Okay.
So
Yep.
the whole child for me seems like, I think in my description it's it's an awesome theme, and it's awesome, but it's actually the one with the least, with the smallest
Oh,
numbers.
yeah.
So
That interesting.
it'll be important for me to say that.
Right.
Yeah.
This is,
Yeah.
Yes. Yep. Though this has, you know, the smallest representation, this could have been what these people talked about the entire time.
Yeah.
So that makes it a really salient theme to them. So even though it's this number, or is the smallest number, this, the research team felt that this was a really salient theme because. That's great, Averin, good. And then just some common mistakes for beginners, and you guys are beginners, I'm still kind of a beginner, so I will include myself in that as well. Not reducing themes enough. So, and you should be there. This is exactly where you're supposed to be. When you are writing your results, and you get your findings, and you send your chapter 4 to your chair, and you're super pumped because you nailed it, and you just know you did, and they send it back and are like, no, not enough. Or your peer debriefer. That's okay. That's where you're supposed to. This is part of the process. And this is the challenge where, kind of in quant research, there's a lot of front-end work about making sure you have this large number of participants and a lot of data, and it takes a while to get all of that data. With qual research, it's a little light on the front end, and then in quant, you click a button, you enter your data, you get it, you're ready to write it up. In qual research, the work's just starting.
Got it.
And it's a little longer, not a little longer, it's a lot longer. And bravo for being here and doing qual research, because people think that it's easy. I had one of my students say, I'm doing qual study because I want to get it done. And I was like, oh God, no.
Whoa.
Hold on, wait a minute, I'm gonna check you hard right now. In the nicest, most supportive way, I'm gonna check you hard, because this is not the place to get it done, or that a get it done type of methodology. Right. So don't be surprised when you think you teased it all out with your team, and then your peer debriefer or your chair or whoever, and they're like, check yourself. That's okay. Don't be discouraged. And then when you get it again and you send it out and they're like, better, but more, that's okay. That's exactly where you're supposed to be. And experienced qual researchers, which I'm not really counting myself as a part of that. I'm a little more experienced than you guys, maybe, but that's why we have peer debriefers. That's why we have these measures of trustworthiness. We're not going to get it right on the first try, and that's okay. Aligning themes directly with interview questions. That is not a reduction of themes. That's or a reduction of data, or a synthesization of data. That means you asked a direct question and your results reflect that. I'm a qual reviewer for one of our counseling journals, and I see that a lot with. Yeah, and
It's always been a problem.
Right, and so that's where you have to be very intentional and step back. And I'll give you guys an example of this in a second. Do you have a question? You can ask it.
No, I think I was confused at first, because I thought that was, how they always say when you do your results section that you have to go back and everything's based off of your research questions.
Correct.
Connecting that, but this is separate.
Correct. This is your interview protocol. So you ask this very broad, or this great question wanting to know about this phenomenon. The phenomenon of being a doc student in at a South Texas university, right? But then you have several interview questions to capture the essence of this phenomenon. And then all of your results line up exactly with your interview, like your themes end up being like, what are the challenges of being a doc student in South Texas? Right. And then your theme is challenges of being a doc student in South Texas. So it shouldn't be that.
Okay.
Right.
And I don't.
Too concrete sequential.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I'll give you guys an example in a second. So not providing enough evidence to support themes, that generally won't happen so much in your dissertations, but when you're when you're turning it to publications, that could be an issue. So making sure that you have those numbers and that there's a thick, rich description of that theme. Rushing the analysis process, I think I not so kindly alluded to that a couple minutes ago. So don't rush the process. I know that's really hard when you're doc students and you're on timeline, and that's really challenging, but really the work really, really starts once you've collected and transcribed all your data. Being apologetic. So in your limitations sections, which, maybe in your discussion section, in your chapter 5, so I know I'm getting a little ahead. But we're not quant research. We're not trying to be quant research. We're not trying to get to generalizability. Don't apologize for it, because that's not the goal. It is what it is, exactly. So there's transferability in qual research, but we're not trying to apply the results of this everywhere. I've had, and the same, and again, it's a bit anecdotally, where my chair and another big qual researcher in counseling said that they've rejected articles, qual studies, because they essentially apologized for not being a quant study. So that's my words, my advice to you guys. It might be different in your disciplines, but we're not trying to be quant research. We are just as rigorous, we are just as valid as quant researchers, so don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Okay, so here's a sample interview protocol from, I got this off Google. So these are some interview protocol questions about participants who were deaf or who had experienced deafness. So describe how you first became aware of your deafness. How do you see yourself today in terms of your deafness? What does deafness mean to you? Can you describe any particularly difficult or traumatic experiences in your life related to deafness? How can you describe, or can you describe how you fit into deaf culture? To what extent do you consider yourself active in both the deaf world and hearing world? And what, if anything, could you change about yourself if you could? And then how does your family view deafness? So these are some sample themes that I came up with this morning based off these questions. And awareness of deafness, personal view of deafness, meaning of deafness, traumatic experiences related to deafness, fitting into deaf culture, managing deaf world and hearing world, desires to change, family views of deafness. And then here are some attempts at sub-themes. In looking at my interview protocol on the left and the themes that I came up with, what do you see?
They match.
Two parallel.
They're way too connected. Like,
correct.
They are the questions.
Right.
100%. Thank you. Yes, this was
I
my.
was like, oh my God, if this is how, I don't understand this at all, if that's what you're supposed to do.
Yes,
like,
no.
oh,
So I've seen this in reviews I've gotten as a qual reviewer, and I've seen this in when I've worked on dissertations, that this is not a synthesis of themes.
Okay.
oh, yeah.
This is, you're not getting to an essence or a phenomenon.
Right.
This is the exact parallel. Yes. And so this is no go. Don't do that. Yeah. So that doesn't tell me anything, right? Or tell your readers anything. You haven't analyzed anything if it mirrors your interview questions.
The interviews.
Yes.
Here's the transcript.
Correct. Yes. So that was what when I told you I had like an example, that is that example. Okay, so also one of the themes when people make or one of the issues for beginners was not reducing enough. So that was one example where there was no reduction of themes. It was just reflective of your interview questions. Bless you.
Bless you.
So this one is a little bit tinier to see, but there are 5 themes: academic responsibilities, non-academic responsibilities, counselor identity, athletic empathy, and holistic congruence. So 5 themes, not too terrible. And then there are like almost 20 sub-themes. What does that tell you?
Does that tell you your themes are too big? Or no? Because there's too many.
There's too many, right?
Yes.
So it merits further reduction.
Okay.
So I've seen where I've had article reviews where they've had 20 themes, 22 themes. That is not enough synthesis.
Got it.
Not enough. So this is actually my very first, this was my dissertation.
Oh.
And this was my very first attempt that I sent to my chair, and I thought it was so great. Oh my God, I'm done. I did it. This is awesome. And by the end, after several,
Oh, that's so.
I had 4 themes and then 7 sub-themes. So I went from 5 to 4 and then reduced all of these.
And I think there's like no way of avoiding this.
There's not.
Your
Yeah.
It's
first,
just, it's the process.
I think
It's
your
the
first,
process.
the first time that you do it, this is gonna happen.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, Abram, you
I
had
think I had like 24.
24.
Okay.
But, and so the debriefer, so Dr. Gerlach allowed me to understand what the difference is between reducing and categorizing. 'Cause
Right.
That's what this is.
That is exactly that.
I'd like to hear
Yes.
more about that.
So these aren't necessary. So you code your stuff, right? And you go do several rounds, and you do a reduction in your codes as you're doing it. Well, and then these are like end up being like your final codes, and then you look at all of your final codes and you collapse them. You're like, okay, I'm taking a step back. I'm looking at it, and I'm reducing into themes.
Right.
And so then I have my themes, but then I still ended up using several of those codes, those initial codes in the transcript as sub-themes.
Okay.
And so, or categories. And so it's not enough reduction. It's too much.
Okay.
And so what can I do to collapse some of these things into broader things? So in addition to that, they have other responsibilities where they have to host workshops and do all of that was folded into academic skills and planning. Then counselor identity, that became counselor practice and knowledge. And those kind of became my sub-themes. So amount of confidentiality ended up getting folded into counseling skills and theory, because part of counseling skills is to make sure that we're confidential, so we're not sharing information, and it's a little different when you're an academic advisor, but that went there. Relationship building became emphasis on fostering relationships, because throughout the entire time, all I heard was building relationships, and so that became a sub-theme of counselor practice and knowledge. So athletic empathy was kind of this novel thing that came out through all of this, and I've gotten feedback from reviewers where they're like, wow, that's super cool. Like, tell me more about that. And so this isn't in the literature, so this organically came out about honoring athletes' experiences, and then they're not just these privileged people, that they really, really have these challenges. Barriers to seeking support services, so that was not a direct, I said, what challenges do you have, what challenges do your athletes experience with getting help? And they provided a whole slew of, counseling, academic, all this other stuff. So that kind of became, but it was pervasive, it was throughout, like I couldn't avoid that. And then this was tied back to my research question. And so it's really important when you're reducing your themes, always tie it back to your research question and the essence of whatever it is that you're trying to understand. So just because you have 40 quotes and 2 from each participant about a particular thing in your transcript, if it doesn't relate back to your research question and what you're trying to understand, then you don't need it. And that's part of the process that's challenging. It's because I have this many, like I've seen this a lot, but if it's totally unrelated, if you are talking to them about math terminology, but then somehow in your conversations everyone starts talking about how much they love Whataburger, that's not related, right? So really making sure that it's tied back to your research question. Does that make sense?
Yep.
So for mine, because mine's dealing with school counselors implementing a school counseling program, and 2 of my questions dealt with how did you become a school counselor? And tell me your educational background. Where those 2 questions had nothing to do with implementation.
Right.
So they didn't produce.
Right. But it was helpful in describing your participants and kind of providing that contextual description, but it doesn't need to be a theme.
Got it.
Good example.
Thank you.
Questions?
So your first draft of your sub-themes, that you had 20 sub-themes, after you reduced, did you did you talk about any of these factors when you were writing your scripture, your descriptions and stuff?
Yeah. So
because I feel like because it might be discouraging, like when you send this to your debriefer and then they tell you you're going to have to cut it down some more. You're not necessarily just forgetting all of this.
Right.
Right. Somewhere.
Right.
Good point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So all of these elements were included. I don't think I deleted any of this stuff, but like for wellness definition, that was kind of included here where I described this. So participants had a really, varied description of what wellness, and that actually, their wellness definition, that was one of my interview questions. How do you define wellness?
Right, okay.
Tell me about how you define that. Well, that ended up being folded into my definition here of, all the participants had really varied definitions of what wellness was to them. And additionally, in looking at their overall description or hearing about their descriptions and interventions and what they do, I found that there were 4 distinct things that they do related to wellness.
Okay.
But I don't need a whole sub-theme on their wellness definitions.
And then go into the sub-themes based on.
Yes. So some of these initial things were involved and described my main theme, but did not merit its own sub-theme.
So really, we're not talking about cutting anything out necessarily. We're talking about remolding.
Yes.
So to speak. It's like taking Play-Doh and it was this shape, but now we're sort of.
Correct.
Right? Okay,
Yes. When I say collapsing,
Okay.
that means that you're not necessarily cutting out. And some of it you might, but
okay.
generally you need to reduce a little or reduce. I see how that kind of sounds like cutting,
Yeah,
but it's more of collapsing or folding on itself. So you're in the middle of this process right here. How can we make it so that it's a broader overarching theme, and then and not every theme merits sub-themes, so you don't have to. Yeah, so academic planning and skills, there's not a whole lot that would merit a sub-theme with that. Same thing with barriers to seeking support. So I just defined it and then provided, participants described barriers, several barriers to seeking support, and it wasn't just with getting mental health help. It was getting academic help. It was talking to teachers. It was going to financial aid to figure out how they're going to pay the rest of their tuition because they're a partial scholarship athlete. So they have a hard time asking for help. However, they have no problem asking for help when they're working with their coaches, which is ironic, right? And so I didn't need a sub-theme for financial aid support and counseling and academic tutoring. So I could describe all of those elements in just one theme.
Okay.
But for each of these were very distinct and large parts of my conversations with my participants. So cultivating holistic wellness in student athletes, no one said that terminology. Nobody came up with it. That was my interpretation, my bird's eye view of what they were talking about related to wellness. So these were kind of wellness things they were talking about, and then these were the specific things like making sure that your students are prepared and have a career outside of college, because athletes, most don't go on to pros. Psychological support, college is hard for everyone, and they ended up providing a lot of almost like individual counseling to their athletes. They worked a lot with coaches, and then they provided case management. So if it was something they couldn't do directly, well, I'm going to send you to the wellness center, I'm going to send you to financial aid, I'm going to send you here or there, and linking them with resources. All of that, no one used those words directly. That was my bird's eye view of what I was hearing and what was evidenced in the transcripts. Does that make sense?
Totally. Thank you.
So you're just folding it, you're remolding it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interesting.
Yeah. What other questions do you guys have? I'm so excited for you guys. You guys are almost there.
It was good. Thank you.
Of course. So these were 2 of the books that I found to be very helpful. Cresswell and Poth. Cresswell's really big. He's written a ton of books on quant, on qual, on mixed methods. He has a great mixed methods book. And then Hayes and Singh, This deals a lot with counseling, but also other educational settings as well. And so those I find them to be very easy, and they provide really good examples, and it's readable to me and not so technical that it makes me, oh my God, I don't want to deal with this because I'm already off put by the style. So I found those to be helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gosh, super cool.
Thank you guys so much.